Good morning, my name is Stretch Hoff. I'm an interviewer with Hamilton County Library. And this morning we're talking with Ted Nightwine, who was in the war in Korea. And he's going to share his experiences, which were many, with us today. So Ted, welcome. We
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming in here.
I'm glad to participate.
Good. We like to start with day one, where you were born, where you grew up, and tell us your life up into when you started in the service.
Oh, okay. I was born December 7th, 1930 in Portland, Oregon. I lived there until I was about 4 or 5. And my father was a machinist, and during the Depression, he would have to go various places to get work. And he worked as a machinist on the railroad, Southern Pacific, I believe, and we moved to Utah out in the desert. And then about 39, he moved to California, to Napa Valley, and had a machinist position at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. And lived there until, till I was about 20, and loved it.
So you lived in Napa Valley,
In Napa
primarily
Valley.
growing up, is that right?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
grew up from about 7 to 20.
Beautiful place.
Oh yeah, can't grow up in a better place.
Yeah,
It was great. In those days, of course, it was very quiet, more peaceful than now.
Yeah. Were a lot of wineries there at that time? Or?
Oh yes.
Yeah, they're that old.
It is. There were major wineries there. Years later, several more came in, and then little boutique wineries popped up in later years.
Yeah.
But the major ones are still there.
My son lives 30 minutes from Sonoma.
Yeah.
So when we visit him, we
That's
get up there.
North of San Francisco is great country to live in.
Okay, so you went to high school?
I went to Napa High School, and then the war came along, and I had been in Alaska making my fortune, so to speak, starving to death, but making my fortune. And the war broke out in Korea, and about 30 days afterwards, the war broke out. I received my orders, which meant that I was AWOL for a month.
Oh, so couldn't find you.
I hurried. My father sent my orders to me, and I came back immediately, reported for duty, and found that there was a $50 reward on my head because of being AWOL. And so the company commander said thank you, and he says he'll claim it.
Oh, really?
And then from that time on begins my journal of the Korean War.
Okay.
I reported all that was left in the company. I had joined the Marine Reserve a year before, and the only people still there on the base at Mare Island for that company was the company who was a captain and the first sergeant. Everyone else had already gone over, and they were leaving in a few days. And then from...
But did you go to Mare Island for training then, or?
No, that's where the...
Because there's a naval base there.
It's a naval base, yeah. But the Marine Corps had a reserve unit there, and they did their training there. And that's why I reported for duty there. And then they checked me over, said I'm fit for duty, and sent me south to Pendleton in Oceanside.
Oh, yeah, okay. And how old are you at this point?
I was 18.
Okay.
And then I went to Camp Pendleton, and my outfit had already gone overseas. So here I am.
You missed it.
I'm floating around loose on the base, and no Liberty cards, no meal passes. And so I finally managed to get myself overseas, but the journal tells all about that.
Okay.
How we came to go. there were a lot of Marines on the base who were floating loose.
Did you join another unit or something? Or?
Yes, well,
Okay.
yeah, it was a nebulous unit. There was no formal number. It just, here are all these loose Marines, and we'll try to send them over. And one day I'm standing on a parade ground waiting for some kind of an assignment. A captain gets up on a platform and says he wants 200 volunteers. Well, 2,000 hands went up.
Yeah.
And so he walked back and forth through the ranks, picked out you over there, you over there. And he gathered up 200, and I was luckily one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that we had just volunteered to fly over, this was in the wintertime, fly over to the Chosin Reservoir in northern Korea, parachute out. I've never even seen a parachute in my life except in a movie. Parachute out over the Chosin Reservoir and help the Marines fight their way out because they'd been encircled along with the Army, fight their way out to the coast. I thought, wow, that's
Now that was your introduction to the Korean War, the Chosin Reservoir?
Well, we flew over several different types of planes. We flew over to Japan, and as we're going across Japan in a train, the word came that the Marines were getting out, but we could still parachute out if we want onto the frozen reservoir, but you'd be behind the enemy lines. So we chose to go south to the Pusan perimeter. And
way south.
Way south, at the
way
very
down
bottom.
south.
So that's where we finally ended up.
Well, that, okay. So that was a good choice, I would say.
Oh.
I don't know why they even...
The only time that I recall the Marine Corps ever allowing you to have a choice.
Uh-huh.
And how foolish, 18-year-old. No, sure, I'll volunteer to fly over and parachute out. And no idea what a parachute even looked like, except that thing that I was sitting on in that canvas bucket seats.
You never jumped before?
Never seen a parachute except in a movie.
Oh my goodness.
It was, they were desperate times, and they wanted to get some men over there to help the Marines out.
Yeah.
Well, luckily we didn't go. Out of the 200 of us that went over, there were 7 a year later that came back.
Is that right?
In the memoir is a photograph of us.
Oh, my. Well, now that was, the Chosin Reservoir was like 1950, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And
late November 50.
Okay. I remember that was a big evacuation, like you said.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The Chinese had come down out of Manchuria across the Yalu River.
Yeah.
Something like 6 armies, I believe, and pushed the Army and the Marines just clear almost off the peninsula.
Off the peninsula.
Almost off, yeah, just barely at the bottom. If the enemy had had better supply lines, they probably could have pushed us right on off, but that was the extent of how far they could go.
Is that in Pusan? Is that
Pusan?
Okay, yeah.
Pusan across to Mason, just a little tiny bit.
Now, where's the Chosin Reservoir? Is it
north?
Is it north of the 38th?
Oh, way north of the 38th.
Because after the original invasion, then the UN was pushing up towards the Yalu River, right? Okay, and then the Chosin Reservoir was above the 38th parallel.
Oh, very much above. It's almost on the Yalu River.
Was that high?
Manchuria.
Okay.
It's all the way up, yeah. North and east.
Okay. And then the Chinese invaded, and that was...
They invaded.
Okay.
Pushed everybody all the way down.
I remember reading it was almost where you almost pushed off the peninsula.
Oh, yes, it was a tight little spot.
Yeah. Okay, so now you went to Pusan.
We went to Pusan and set up the 1st Marine Division. It was the only Marine Division at the time. Set up camp in that perimeter and awaiting the men as they straggled out from the north, came by ship and around and joined us. built up the strength until there was enough to go into the assault again.
So did the men were coming back? Did you get more supplies and then
Oh, yes.
by the water, and you got more men there and
Yeah,
more supplies?
everything, all supplies were coming in through Pusan, the harbor,
Okay.
and then brought by train across to the Mason area where the Marines were.
So if it hadn't been for the supply lines that the Chinese
enemy.
did not have,
Right.
it would have been,
They probably could have pushed the UN right straight out of Korea, but they were, I guess, stretched to the limits,
yeah.
and they just couldn't push any further.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, the Army was giving them a lot of trouble around that area, pushing north again.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent time in the Pusan area building up both our supplies and the men.
Mm-hmm.
New drafts would be sent constantly to bolster the Marines there.
I bet that was a scary thing for you to go through.
It really was. It really was. We had very little fighting and skirmishes in the mountains above us. We were all in a little valley, and then our front line was just mountains above us. But that's where we trained what to do, because the men coming over were new, untrained, and they would mix the veterans that came from the chosen area and to train us, so to speak, mix us in.
Yeah. Wow. Now what time of the chosen reservoir? I say is late in the 1950. I know the Battle of Incheon was September of 1950.
Yeah, that was early. Yeah.
And that was the big effort to go in there.
They swept up, yeah. They went almost, went almost up. The Army and the Marine Corps went almost up to the Yalu River, to the Manchurian border, or Chinese border, and that's, I guess, what made the Chinese so nervous, is MacArthur wanted to go across the Yalu and finish it all off. And the Chinese armies massed, just came straight through. Just pushed and captured numerous people.
Yeah.
It was a very fast, mobile unit. They just swept right on down. Captured Seoul again and just kept right on going.
So tell us then about once all the supplies were in Pusan and you were ready and you were going back up. Tell us about that.
We thought we would be going land-wise, but Marine Corps, no. They took us to another port. I'm not sure if it was Pusan or where exactly, and we loaded on LSTs, those nice flat-bottom LSTs. Went out and around and up to an area, Pohang, and we were put off on the beach at Pohang and walked across the hills to the city of Pohang and set up a large camp there, and the whole division. And from there, we participated in guerrilla hunting, taking company-sized patrols out into the enemy territory and trying to catch guerrillas, because as the Army moved north through the western and central Korea, they bypassed a lot of enemy troops that would hide out. And so we went out trying to capture them, do away with them. So from Pohang, we did a lot of that up through the central and eastern part of Korea, through the cities, Wachon and all those big cities.
My goodness. Now, did you reach the 38th parallel then at that point?
Yeah.
And,
I don't remember exactly when. I'd have to look at the memoirs. But yes, we reached the 38th parallel. We went above the 38th parallel. We quite a few miles north of it, kept going. Watch-on area, watch-on reservoirs above the 38th. Did a lot of fighting back and forth across the 38th, but didn't seem to pay any attention to the 38th. We're just after mountain tops, mountain after mountain after mountain.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was above the 38th parallel, the battles, both Marines and the Army.
Now tell us, when the Chinese had that, what they call the New Year's offensive, and that was in December of '51. Is that what finally pushed people back when we were just around the 38th parallel at that point?
December of '51, no, it's before that, because December of '51, the front lines were almost static, almost in place until the end of the truce. So the large Chinese invasion, not just the one in winter of '50, but then in early '51, the Chinese charged down, and the battle lines were going back and forth. As they would push down, we would push back, down and back.
And that was around.
And that was in the spring, I think, of '51.
Okay.
And that lasted for a long time. There were, I'd have to look at the book, but they, the enemy pushed deeply into South Korea, and then we Marines and the Army pushed them back again. And the United Nations forces, there were a lot of countries fighting with us, and we would come in contact with some of the foreign troops once in a while. They were fascinating to meet them, to be on top of a mountain on the front line, and then all of a sudden hear bagpipes.
There's a lot of place. Yeah.
Back down, a little calmness in the battle, and look down behind the mountain, and here you see coming up the road bagpipers with the troops, the British Commonwealth troops behind them. I thought, oh man,
do they know there's a war going on
What's
here?
going on?
Yeah.
It was there were fun times, beautiful, soul-inspiring times, as well as horror and devastation.
Yeah.
We saw an awful lot of that.
Yeah. But I remember there was a long period of time there was up above and below the 38th parallel, and like you said, they would come down, you'd push back, and they'd push back.
Back and forth and up and down. Korea ended up being sort of like World War I.
Yeah.
It was all trench warfare. Oh my golly, I must have dug so many miles of trenches and foxholes, whether it's riverbeds or frozen or on the sides of cliffs. We were forever digging.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we got at what we thought was comfortable or safe, we'd move out and jump into the enemy's trenches, use them. They were always on the wrong side of the ridge line, though. They're on the south side, so to speak, facing us, whereas ours are always on the north side facing them. So,
well, it seems like the Chinese at that point must not have had overwhelming numbers against the UN then, or could they? It seems like the Chinese kept coming and coming, and it's amazing they didn't really break through again. And
I like to think that the Marines and the Army are better soldiers.
Yeah.
The Chinese Army, they were good, and they were massive. Some of the units were good. All of them were massive, but they weren't fighting for their own land. The people who you really had difficulty with were the North Korean Army. They were fighting in their own land.
Yeah.
They had a cause. Of course, we had on our side the Korean Marine Corps, and they were spectacular to watch. Nothing stopped them, and they were marvelous. We'd be on the lines, front lines. Sometimes our units would butt up against theirs side by side, and that was always bad times because the enemy did not attack them. they'd find a softer target, they'd move next door and hit the regular Marines.
Really?
Because hitting the Korean Marines would bring nothing but trouble to the enemy, whereas the U.S. Marines would put up a good fight, but not like the Korean Marines. They were, I can never say enough good about those men.
Wow, I hadn't heard that aspect of it.
Oh, they were something else.
Very well trained and...
Oh, very well. Led by U.S. Marine NCOs, and many of their officers were Japanese trained Marines, and they were tough.
Wow.
They were tough. I would not like to have to keep up with them. They do not stop. It was marvelous to watch.
Wow. Now, you were you were serving in Korea, I have till the end of 1951. Is that?
Yeah, the end of November 51 or the first part of December of 51. I don't remember exactly. And in fact, the night before I left the lines, the Chinese had their first winter offensive, wearing their new white uniforms because it was deep snow.
Oh yeah.
And that night, there were 8 of us that survived, and that night one didn't. And my platoon was out front of the front lines on a little point that describes it in the book. Surrounded at night by the enemy, totally surrounded. And during the day, connected to the front lines by a trench. And the next morning, after this opening offensive of the Chinese, we were to leave, and we all gathered up at the company CP and down the mountainside to battalion and then regiment and then finally to the coast.
So the fact you were surrounded, did they not attack at night, or did?
Oh, yes.
So how'd you get out of there? This trench you're talking about?
The
down?
trench, yeah,
Okay.
but in the daytime,
Excuse me.
in the daytime, we could protect the trench with mortars
Oh, okay.
or gunfire from our own front lines, which were aimed right at us, or ourselves, because on this little mountain, this little rock, they called it, that we were out on, facing, probably 30 feet from the enemy's positions, the same thing. Myself and another man, we were the last foxhole, so to speak, in the trench, little bunker, between ourselves on the rock and the front lines. And during that night, we had one situation that happened. During the night, of course, the enemy can go all the way around and cross and get into the trench.
Yeah.
And we could hear them coming. And so same thing we always do, we wait around a curve of the trench. They're not straight trenches, they're curved. So as you hear them coming, you throw a grenade over into the trench behind where you know they are. It explodes and they jump around the corner, and then of course you shoot. And during that time, the one fellow was killed. Next morning, we happily
Got out of there.
The company commander phoned our little platoon and said, okay, so-and-so and so-and-so, get back.
Was this a surveillance point you were out on? Is
Yeah.
that the purpose of it?
It was. It served a couple of purposes, I think. That it was a good observation point for the enemy ridges to the north and west of us, the mountains. And if we allowed the enemy to take that rock, then they would be within attacking distance of the front lines. And with masses of men, they could have,
Yeah.
done great damage. that was a scary little spot.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I don't remember ever really sleeping out there at night, even if you're off watch. It was a beautiful spot. We had some of the deepest snow of the winter, and it was beautiful and white.
It's amazing you can think beautiful things for that situation.
Well, you have to. All through Korea, there was a lot of beautiful landscape, and some that we just destroyed, something terrible. The mountaintops are just bald sticks.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of beautiful things and kind people and a lot of bad ones.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful country until we fought a war over it.
Yeah. When you were on that rock, as you call it, then you got off the next morning. Now, was that your exit from the war?
Yes.
So you were in a very precarious situation just before, and you knew you were going to leave the next day?
Yes. We were supposed to leave
early
the next morning. And so the few of us, I don't remember how many, there may have been one other man on the rock that left with me. The rest were in the company, back on lines, other platoons.
Was this high up?
It's on top of a mountain.
Okay.
Craggy mountain. The top of the rock wasn't any wider than this room, and just long, narrow, literally a rock. And so we gathered at the company command post. And the company commander wished us well, and by the way, take off your boots. Now this is a foot or two of snow. We had been issued the morning before, we had been issued special boots. A few of us, that they sent the right sizes. We had shoe packs that allowed your feet to freeze, and they were not waterproof. They were terrible. And they finally designed and sent to us good Arctic type boots. And the company commander says, you guys, there were only a couple of us that had them, off with the boots and leave them for other men.
Yeah.
So I took them off, and I ran down the back of that mountain in stocking feet with the rest of the guys. Didn't care. Snow felt good.
And how old were you then?
I was 19 then.
Yes.
I was an old man of 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you, so you come down, and then what happens? How do you get home, or what's your, what did you do after that?
We come down the mountainside to Battalion, then they got us in some trucks, took us to regimental command, and then from there, somewhere else probably, but we ended up in trucks going toward the coast. And I think, I'm not sure, but it seemed to me at the time that we were going along a little coast road through the enemy lines to some place where offshore would be the ship, a big transport that would take us to Japan for fattening up a little before they sent us back, because I was pretty skinny by then. And we spent 9 days, I think, in Japan at above Kyoto, beautiful mountain, little village. That was a Japanese officers training camp had passed. And we spent 9 days there fattening up, going into Kyoto.
Beautiful city. It's a beautiful city.
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was very fun. And we saw no war damage there. When we first flew over and landed in Tokyo at the airport, we drove by train across Korea in the very beginning, across Japan, and stopped in Hiroshima. And that was the time when I thought, wait a minute, war isn't so pretty.
Yeah.
And
what happened to all the beautiful snow-capped mountains?
Yeah, right. And then from there on, we went on to Kobe and back over to Korea. So coming back, we took ship from Kyoto all the way back to the States, San Francisco.
Great.
12 days.
I'd like to, this time, Ted has written a memoir, which is in excess of 400 pages about his Korean experience, which is an amazing book, and I'd like you to just tell us about that and how this came to be.
How it came.
Yeah, because it's a very unique book.
Well, when I arrived home at the end, just before Christmas of 51.
51, okay.
3 days before Christmas, they let all the men who were living within 100 miles of San Francisco off the ship. The rest had to go to San Diego to be disembarked because there wasn't time for anybody to get any farther than just locally. So that's where I got off. And a couple of days later, I'm walking down the street in Napa, and I ran across someone I knew, and they said, where you been? What are you wearing the uniform for? And I told them I'd been in Korea, and they said, where's that? What's going on there? They had no idea. There was a war going on. I guess that was the beginning.
That's amazing.
That was the beginning of the forgotten war, and I think it was forgotten for 5 decades now. The last 10 years, it has come into the fore, finally. So I'm walking down the street, and this friend says, where you been? What have you been doing? It made me so angry that how ignorant they were. I knew a friend who had in the northern part of Napa, there's an old extinct volcano. He owned some land and a cabin up in the redwoods there. So I went up in the redwoods and lived in this cabin, no electricity, no water, no nothing. And I decided I'm going to write down everything that happened. So I started with the first day before I went to Korea and all the way through Korea, remembering it day by day. And probably over the years.
Which is remarkable that you could do that day by day.
It probably nearly killed me. I probably missed about a week, maybe, separate days throughout the year that I couldn't remember what was going on. And there's probably discrepancies of days, but I put down everything I could remember that happened day by day. And then I just wrote it in longhand, stored it away.
And you were telling me earlier that this took you 3 months.
It took about 3 months to write it, all in longhand, quick as I could. And then probably a year later, I typed it all up, and then just put it away in a box, and then decided, someday, when I got it all together.
When you're 20.
When I'm 20, a long time ago, away.
Yeah.
And,
you're still 19, right?
I'm still 19. Well, let's see. 51, I just turned 20.
Just turned 20.
I was an old man of 20. So then, about 5 years ago, my oldest son decided to get this printed and bound for me. In the meantime, I had corrected it all, but not changed any of it. Just corrected spelling and punctuation, and then left the content all there. And so he got that printed up for me, gave it to family members. And,
this book contains photographs. There's 400 plus pages of your history over there.
Yes.
It's a magnificent book. I've never seen anything like it. It's amazing. Newspaper clippings, photographs.
Letters home.
Letters home.
Some letters home.
Wow. Good therapy for you, was it, or it was tough?
I think it nearly put me in the hospital, but I think it was good therapy. I got it out of my system.
Yeah.
You still remember those things, but you don't dwell on them. I had a friend who saved his life a couple of times over there. Shouldn't have. He's an awful pest. But yeah, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But he dwells on it constantly.
You still can.
I haven't heard from him in a long time, but he he dwelt on it
Yeah.
and relived it, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget it, but I don't want to live on it
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
That was enough just going over it and correcting
Oh.
the spelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the 19-year-old spelling wasn't too great, hadn't been to college yet.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful book. Well, now tell us, you spent 3 months writing this, and you're 20 years old, and now what?
Yeah.
Tell us about the rest of your life here. What's been going on
Oh, it all went downhill. No.
in the next 20 minutes?
Not too long after that, I met my wife, the girl that was to be my wife in San Francisco. We both worked there. And then I went to college and wanted to become an architect, but changed my major to art history. So I became an art historian at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And then my first job with my degree out of college was here at the University of Cincinnati as the
Really?
curator of their fine arts collection, which was scattered all over the campus. It wasn't any one place, no museum. And after 4.5 years at the university cataloging all their art, finding it first and then cataloging it, I took an apprenticeship after a couple of years of other classes with the fine art, with the Cincinnati Art Museum, and I went to the museum, encouraging several students to come over and study museology with the director, and I did that for a couple of years, and then he talked to me into, the director talked me into coming over as an apprentice in conservation laboratory. It was fascinating. I loved it, so I spent about 10 years as an apprentice and worked there for another 14 years altogether, I guess, something like that or more.
Yeah.
And then went to San Francisco as a conservator in 2 of the museums out there, and then to Sarasota, Florida, and designed and built the laboratory for the Ringling Museum in Sarasota.
Yeah.
Then went out into private practice because there's so few trained conservators in the South. And I spent 30-some years as a conservator. Beautiful way of life. Looking and handling beautiful objects. And it's a peaceful work.
Now, so you were like an independent contractor to these museums, were you? And you were going on?
No, I was on the staff of all the museums.
Okay.
And then in Florida, after being on the staff there, I branched out into private practice.
Yeah, that's what I was.
And then I was a private contractor for various southern museums. And they couldn't afford laboratories, but they would take me on.
Wow. And you would organize all their different items they had?
Their art, the
Art?
paintings.
Yeah.
It's a painting conservator, restoration of paintings.
Oh.
It's a fun life.
You
Very
sound,
peaceful.
oh, you sound so satisfied.
Love it.
You really do. I just was at last week at the Cincinnati Art Museum, and they had that fellow in there. This it's got is it a Monet? He's
Oh
doing?
yeah, yeah.
And,
No, Renoir.
Renoir.
Or, I mean, a Degas. Yeah, one of his last paintings, the
And
couple in the stand of trees.
Yeah, and he's going through and cleaning
Yeah.
this meticulously.
Removing wax. So evidently, after I had left, some years later, someone had lined the painting with wax resins, and it penetrated through
It was coming right
through the
through.
cracks.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't come through the paint; it comes through the cracks. And they're a lot of very heavy impasto on that paint, and they're digging out, so to speak, the wax that's in there, because it can discolor. That painting, when I first saw it, I had given it a light cleaning when I was there on their staff.
Really? In what
Many
year
years.
was that?
Oh, golly, what year? Oh, heavens.
My wife will want to know this when I tell her about it.
I don't know. They were sending it to Paris for an exhibition of painting, and it needed a little cleaning, get the dust off. That's all we did. I don't remember the date, but it was fun.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It's,
How much is that painting worth?
oh heavens, priceless.
Yeah,
It goes into the multiple millions.
yeah,
Anything like that, they're priceless.
wow, amazing. So, you met your wife in San Francisco and you all came to Cincinnati. You've been here down to Sarasota.
Well, yeah.
What brought you back up from Sarasota?
We were here first in Cincinnati about 5-6 years probably, and then moved to California to the museums, and then from there we moved to Sarasota and set up the laboratory in the museum there, in the Ringley Museum. We were there for about 25 years in Sarasota. And then we decided to move up north. Maybe our kids would join us. One's in Richmond, Virginia, one's in Texas.
Yeah.
They're still there. You know how kids are.
Yeah.
So we moved up here, and we had some dear friends here, 3 of which have died since we moved here, all younger than we are. And but it's a beautiful city. We tried to talk our daughter, who has 5 kids, say, come to Cincinnati. It's a beautiful city to raise children in.
Oh, yeah.
It
sure
is beautiful. So here we are.
That's great. I'm just curious, at Ringling, what work were you doing there? Was it organizing all the art they had at that point?
They hired me as the chief conservator.
Okay.
They didn't have a laboratory. I built the laboratory and then restored their paintings.
Okay.
And finally we hired a staff, and then I went out into private practice.
Okay.
And the laboratory there is still functioning, taking care of their art.
Wow, that's wonderful. You have a twinkle in your eye when you talk about what you did for a living and the city of Cincinnati, and you made the mountains of Korea sound beautiful.
They were beautiful. My wife asked me once, would I ever like to visit any of those places? And I think of my crutches here. No, I couldn't make those mountains. There's no specific spot. It's just certainly no city, because any city we saw was totally destroyed.
Yeah.
And but the mountains, some of the mountains and valleys, and some of the flowers we'd find in the spring.
I remember on the internet, no more than 6 months ago, seeing pictures of Seoul. The new the city is
so
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable how modern it is.
Yeah. I'm sure all the cities that we went through there are all changed and modern now.
Yeah.
Well, it's been over 60 years.
Yeah. So you have, tell us, how many children and grandchildren do you have?
We have 3, 2 sons, and I have 2 daughters, one by a previous marriage. One son, our youngest son, was killed about 10, 15 years ago. And our oldest son is an architect in Austin, Texas. Our oldest daughter is in Southern California. She's a doctor in psychology. And our other daughter is in Richmond, Virginia, married to a dentist. She's the one who has 5 children. The daughter that this psychiatrist has 1, and our son has none. He's got cats instead. And they're all prospering, it seems.
Well, that's good. That's good. Anything to add? Or do we?
No, my son made a CD.
Just read this if we missed something.
Yeah, read that if you missed it. My son made a CD of that to send to the library.
Oh, good.
Or any place that's needed.
Great.
And I have not read through it myself in 20 years probably or more since I finished correcting it 30 years ago.
Well, I'm sure you know every paragraph.
Yeah.
What an effort.
I don't need to read it.
It's amazing. Just amazing. Well, this has been most interesting.
I appreciate the program. One thing, if we have time,
Sure.
might mention the one thing here that was so unique was the first helicopter assault in history. Nowadays, as people look at TV, helicopters are always swarming with troops in them and dropping out and so forth in Vietnam. This was the first time that helicopters were used to take troops from behind the enemy lines up onto the enemy lines. And our company, I guess, was given the privilege. And we were loaded up on these great, big, old, bulky helicopters and taken up through the valleys, and then all of a sudden up right on top of a mountain, which was held by the enemy. And about 3 feet off the ground, we all jumped out, and helter-skelter, the enemy running one way and we running the other, and everybody intermixed and banging into each other. Finally, we captured the hill, and down the mountain and up the next hill too. But it was the first helicopter assault.
That's
And there's
amazing.
a fold-out in there, big headlines from the San Francisco paper.
Did the Chinese even know what the helicopter was?
Oh yeah, they'd seen them plenty.
Yeah, but that was the first assault.
But this
huh?
was the first time it dumped troops out on top of them. And that was
And
a
you
little
were
scary.
there. Made history.
Yeah. And always thought that was very unique. So I was sure to put in the big newspaper headlines for it.
Okay, I'll take a
Fold
look
it
at
up.
Okay, well, it's been great. It's such a fascinating story. And it sounds to me like you had many, many times that you're just lucky to be alive and sitting here.
Oh,
I mean,
yes. In there I described attacks on mountaintops, going up the hills, and you could see bullet holes going through your jacket or your pant leg. And it's amazing. One instance where my buddy and I were in a foxhole, and he missed waking me up, and when I awoke in the morning, he's standing above me dead, throat cut by the enemy sneaking up. But didn't know I was there, or I wouldn't have made it.
oh,
There are many times comical circumstances, even during the war, even during battles. The instance where I was wounded ended up being a comical situation.
how could that have, what was it? Tell us.
If there's time. We were on top of a mountain, of course. It had taken us about 3 days to capture the mountain slowly. And I'm digging in my foxhole. We're always digging our foxholes. And this is while an assault is going on by the enemy, counterattack. And one of my friends told me this later, that I had gotten about 3 inches or 4 inches deep in my foxhole digging. And he said during the assault, he said he looked over at me and he could see my boots and my helmet, and that was all. He said, I don't know how you got in that 3-inch hole, but you were all in that hole, your boots and your helmet. And in that position, about 10 feet from me, was another fellow squatting down, firing. On the other side of me, same distance, was another fellow. The fellow on my right, a mortar shell lit right between his legs and exploded. Not a scratch on him other than it knocked his rifle up, cut his forehead, and he fainted, or concussion. Me, 10 feet away, I was wounded, just plastered with little pieces of shrapnel. 10 feet on the other side of me, the man was killed with a big chunk of shrapnel. And that's when I had I'd called for the corpsman, come and see me. I could hardly breathe. It knocked the wind out of me, and there was holes all over me. And I said, oh boy, I get to go home. I'm wounded. And he says, Nightwine, you're walking, aren't you? Yeah, I can walk back. He says, walking wounded, stay here and fight. So I went back to my 3-inch foxhole. And he gave me a couple of Band-Aids to put on. The blood was leaking all over. And during one of the counterattacks, the enemy charged right up, and I had a Browning automatic rifle, and the barrel had become white hot, and I dropped it. You know, you couldn't use it. And he came charging up with a bayonet, and so I ducked around a tree, and he chased me around the tree, jabbing me in the rear end, you know, grinning and yelling. And here on both sides were my buddies, just sitting there laughing and enjoying the whole show. Finally, someone shot the enemy, or I'd have been dead for sure. Oh, I was mad at them.
Oh, jeez.
But there were comical things that happened during the war, and sweet things. You had great rapport with your comrades.
Oh, yeah.
And even there were instances in there where we had interchange with the enemy. And there were many good things. There were awful times too. Horrible, you know. Having your friends die in your arms is not fun. Mm-hmm. But especially for a 19-year-old, 20-year-old.
Do you ever see any of your old combat?
Oh, no.
Any reunions of any kind? Or?
No, I don't like reunions. There aren't enough of us left of that group.
Yeah.
And this fellow who I had dragged out of a minefield, saved him a couple times, he always wants to go to these reunions, and I don't. Mm-hmm. I don't want.
Well, you've taken the healthy route. You know, you put that behind you.
I think so.
You have great memories. You have bad and good, and beautiful.
Right.
And
I don't have nightmares.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever did. If I did, I don't remember them.
Yeah.
So it's one reason that I think this book could be valuable. In most books on wars are written by officers. Mm-hmm. This is written by a PFC. Mm-hmm. I became a sergeant later, but that was way after the war. Mm-hmm. But this is written by a private Marine complaining about officers, of course. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to do that, I think.
Yeah, part of the deal.
Oh, it's part of the deal, yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought this has got to be told, at least I only did it for my posterity, which I didn't have at the time and wasn't married at the time, but I knew someday I would have. Yeah. And so I wrote it for the posterity.
Have you ever tried to do something with this book? I mean, to get it out there
I
so
never
people
did.
know about it?
I never did. This is the first.
Yeah.
And so I had about 8 of these bound and printed, and I've given them to family and a couple of dear, very close friends. Mm-hmm. This is the last one. I gotta keep. Yeah. I don't want to let that one out. Yeah. But my son made some CDs off of it, so one can go to the Library of
Congress.
Library of Congress.
Right.
But I never tried to get it published, out on the market.
It just seems like I don't know who, but someone somewhere ought to know about this.
I would like someone to someday, yes.
Yeah.
But just to let them know what the war really felt like for the guy carrying the rifle.
Yeah, yeah.
And goods and the bads. My wife says that it shows a transition of an 18 or 19-year-old to an adult, during that time.
Why was a tour of duty 1 year? Was that kind of a standard thing over there? Or?
Yeah, they wanted to. The Army and the Marine Corps set up a rotation so that you weren't in combat too long. Okay. And the Marine Corps was a little lax because there weren't enough men to replace them. Yeah. The Army was sending people back after 6 months or so, getting them out of combat so that they wouldn't stay so long. I think that this group that was finally left, these 7 of us were probably been there the longest. That was 12 months, so I figured this was time to get these guys out of here.
Yeah. Unlike today where you're
years, they get to come back and forth. But I look at the men in the Near East and women fighting there, and I think, how can they move with all this, encumbered with all this gear
Isn't
on
it
them?
amazing? I've thought the same
I
thing.
had a field jacket with holes in it, you know, and I was perfectly happy.
And they're carrying all these things, and it's hot.
Hot, yeah. Korea is, in the summer, is tropical. It's hot.
Yeah.
And in the winter, it's Siberian. It comes
Yeah.
off of Manchuria, just something terrible.
Yeah.
But we're not encumbered with all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just, whew.
Oh,
Of course, they
really?
have a lot of good things, the radios and the communications and the
Yeah.
bulletproof vests and all, wow.
They're kind of a little independent person walking
They
around
really
there,
are.
yeah, with
They
food
really
and
are.
so forth, yeah.
Yeah.
Ted, thank you very, very much.
You're very,
It's
very welcome.
great.
Thank you for,
Thanks for your service.
oh,
This is so interesting.
thank you. Appreciate it very
Okay.
much, being asked.
Okay, well, we appreciate you being here.